All right, cool. So, how did that happen? How is your name on both of these? That's funny.
What did I do?
Um,
Oh God, I'm sorry.
well, my name is not Laura Black. I'm Ben Lamoth. I lead
I'm
the
sorry. That was my
Pardot.
fault.
It's okay. I lead the Pardot practice at BDO Digital, which is a Salesforce partner agency, and I work with clients globally. Myself and my team with their Pardot needs, whether it's small or large. Um, and I also at Dreamforce last year, I was given the golden hoodie, which is pretty cool. It's in my closet over there. There's not many occasions where it where it makes sense to wear it, but it's a cool thing to have. And yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Ben Lamoth. I'm probably more active on LinkedIn. So if we're not connected, feel free to send me a connection request. But yeah, and go ahead, Laura.
Hey everyone, I'm Laura Black. Been around Pardot world for a long time. I'm not a consultant anymore. I did about 2 years Pardot consulting. Went back client side. I work for a company called League, but I've been working with Pardot since 2011 and been a Pardot user group leader since 2016, maybe something like that. Really excited to help people learn more about Pardot. And I am on Twitter pretty frequently. I'm at Pardot Pro on Twitter. You can also find me on LinkedIn. This is my assistant for the day. This is Harley. He's going to hang out just a little bit.
I was wondering if Harley was gonna make an appearance.
He's I'm
Um,
going to hand him off. We have some people doing some work here, so I just wanted to say if you hear some weird noises, this bird.
he's
Wow.
an unofficial Pardot mascot.
Yes, I call him the Pardot parrot because when you type
Yeah,
Pardot wrong into Google, it's like, do you actually mean parrot? Um, so yeah.
nice.
But yeah, so Ben approached me about wanting to do Pardot Specialist, and like I said, we jammed it into like an hour and a half sometime last year, and so we thought, okay, let's break this up. So
Yeah,
there's
it was
actually three.
well intended, but like we at about like the I don't know the 45-minute mark. I'm just like, we're like halfway through it, and we've got
And
so
not
much.
enough
We just
time.
like so I was telling people I'm like, you need to get through this as quickly as possible. I felt really bad, so I was like, we need to do one that's more like
Yeah.
substantive that gives people time to kind of hear the material and us to answer questions and so on. Um,
So
so
this is going to be broken up into 3 sessions. We're going to cover 2 pretty intensive topics each time and do Q and
yeah,
A's as we can. And I tend to be really heavy with my slides, so I'll probably zip through things. But the thing about Pardot is there's no dev org that you can really use, and a lot of people don't know how to navigate in Pardot unless they're a Pardot customer already. So I just did a lot of screenshots that are like, here's what I'm talking about, and here's where you would find it. So hopefully that gives everyone some context as I go through
yeah.
my part.
Well, as a partner, I am able to get access to some dev orgs. So
Yeah,
I do. So I did open my dev org here in case there's something I need to jump into
awesome.
the show that's more substantial than a slide. So the
Yes.
first 2 topics that we're going over here, actually, so first is the exam guide itself. Um, there's a link there.
Mhm.
You can,
So that'll
well, I
take
guess
you
I'll,
out to the page that tells you all about like here's trailheads to study, here's sections that it's gonna, what it is. It's 60 questions and all that good stuff. And so if anybody's new to Salesforce certifications, these guides are available for everything. And these sections that say the outline, they'll say that like out of 60 questions, 8% is weighted on this, and administration is 11%. And if you drop
mm-hmm.
those down, it'll tell you what to study. So this session 1, we're covering visitors and prospects and administration. And then we're going to dive into the other ones in future sessions. So
Yeah, and when people, I mean, I've been frustrated by it too. It says 8%. The weighting of it is really can be very frustrating because it's not straightforward. It's not
yeah.
like, oh, I got 50 out of 100. I got 50% on the exam. No, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
These weighted values on the questions inform the weighted value in terms of the whole score. So like you
So
got
this, yeah.
one out
So
of
the exam is like,
five. Sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
Well, the exam is like 60 questions, and you need, I think it's like a 72% to pass. And so out of 60 questions, 11% of the questions are about administration.
Yeah.
And so you need a pretty significant score, a number of correct questions to pass.
This is
So
higher than it used to be. It didn't used to be
it is.
72%.
And oh, thank you, Mary, for dropping it in the link. So anyway, so it is a multiple choice question. It is $200 to take the exam. It's $100 for a retake. What some people don't realize is if you pass or fail, you get the stats about how well you did on each section. It won't tell you got 3 questions right, 2 questions wrong, but it'll tell you on administration, you got 50%, which means you got half the questions right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it does help you understand what you need to study more for. So it is an intense exam. There's a lot of reading. Anyway, we're going to try and help you understand what to study and help you understand what's going to be on the test so you can take it, pass it, tell us good news on Twitter and LinkedIn.
And I mean, something like kind of, because there's 2 exams. There's the specialist and the consultant. The difference between the 2 is that specialist, and Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, I know that you've been involved in the development of some of these the content. My understanding of it, it's been a while since I've taken the exam, is that the distinction is that specialist is more around, do you understand the functionality? Do you understand? Yeah. Can you give a distinction between an automation rule and a segmentation rule? Do you understand how prospect audit works? Do you understand how to create and map users? Those kinds of things. Consultant is much more situational. It's, company XYZ has this thing. Which of these 5 options would you recommend?
Yeah.
It's
so
much more.
Yes.
It's some people have said it's easier or harder, but it really just depends on the kind of, I don't know, their experience in the platform to date, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, you have to take and pass your specialist before you can take your consultant. The consultant is much more intense, and basically as a consultant, you're expected to really be an expert and be able to assist your clients in deciding, maybe you need to take this out of Pardot and it should be something you do in Salesforce. And it's much more heavy on the text. So the Pardot specialist is much more, here's a short something that's happening. Which one would you as the admin go pick? The consultant is like a wall of text that you have to read. There's a red herring in it that you have to eliminate and then pick the best from the 5 options. So literally the consultant took me longer to pass, just longer to take it just because there was so much more reading. So it is, Salesforce does like to structure its tests along real world examples. Like, as the Pardot admin, someone from sales comes to you and asks you, can they get an alert about X, Y, and Z? What tool would you use to accomplish this? Very, very straightforward question that you'll see on either exam. The consultant exam will throw in some stuff like, after consulting with the Salesforce admin and evaluating something, would you recommend buying a new tool, buying something? Yeah. So just be aware that the specialist is first, and it's definitely the place to start. If you have hands-on with Pardot, like 6+ months of hands-on, you can probably take the exam and pass it. But if you've never touched Pardot, don't work for a company that has Pardot, we're going to take you through the sections to help you understand what's on the exam. And we are linking at the slides. We'll distribute the slides. We are linking out to the Trailhead articles, trail mixes rather. The Trailhead modules are relevant to Pardot and to the specialist exam. But again, because you can't log in and play with things, it is a little bit different than some other exams. So yeah, I mean, let's just dive in. Let's see, what questions people have as we go.
All righty. So obviously we've talked about this here. It used to be under 70%, I think. It used to be like 68 or something, right?
So I just took the advanced admin and I had to get 65%. So it does vary from exam to exam. And then Salesforce does refresh these occasionally. So, and what I noted here is that there are 60 multiple choice questions, but you're actually going to get asked 65 questions. There's 5 questions sprinkled throughout the exam. You won't know which ones they are, but they're evaluating, are these good questions to incorporate into a future version of the exam? Basically, if like everyone who gets these questions gets it wrong, that's not a good question. Maybe it's written badly, so on and so on. So, it should be a generous amount of time for you to take this multiple choice exam, 90 minutes, and you can go in person or you can do the online proctored exam. The thing about online proctored is like you want it to be in a room where like what Ben has, where there's nothing behind you. The fact that I have a screen behind me and on that side there's a TV, like the proctors would be looking at me going like, what does she have on? She's got a lot of stuff. She's got to be cheating. So you want to be in like an empty room when you're doing an online proctored exam.
Yep.
So.
All right. So the I'm not going to go into this because we've already kind of addressed that. So what we'll be talking about today is visitors and administration. And so the two questions, like the two concepts that they put forward that kind of encapsulate this section is be able to describe the relationship between visitors and prospects, and given a scenario, apply the appropriate plan of action using prospect audits. And Laura, feel free to add color, correct me if I misstated something. But what I want, the way that I'm going to kind of do this is, I did this based on how I would explain the kind of origin of visitors, how someone becomes a visitor, how someone gets cookied by Pardot, how that relationship exists, how to review that data in Pardot, and so on. So the first thing to know about visitors is the anonymous visitor. So an anonymous visitor, as it says, is someone who's visited a page with a Pardot tracking code. That's like that's a critical bit. If you've used HubSpot, Marketo, Eloqua, any other kind of tool, they all have their own flavor of a tracking code. And this will be set on typically on a third-party site. So if your company has a website, you would add the tracking code either to the actual web page or to a tag management solution that you're using. And what'll happen is a visitor will visit the website, and if they're unknown, meaning Pardot does not have an active cookie associated to them, so the visit happens, pings back to Pardot, says, nope, don't know who association, it's an anonymized visitor. Pardot will still retain that anonymized information as an anonymized person. So they website visits, things like that will be retained in this kind of hidden kind of user, if you will, or you prospect, and that anonymous visitor will do whatever they do. And then let's fast forward to, okay, cool, they've actually now become a known prospect. So the difference between a known prospect and a visitor is that a visitor obviously has no prospect associated to them. Pardot has no idea who they are, other than an IP address and a cookie that's been placed on their browser. But if they were to do any of these four things, they submit a Pardot form that's iframed into a web page. They submit a form that's connected via Pardot form handler. We'll talk about some of these things in future sessions. But the takeaway here is, do they complete a form that is somehow associated to Pardot, either on a hosted web page or on a Pardot landing page, something else we'll also talk about later. There's also a fourth way to do this where there is manual association, and I'm going to get to that on a future slide here. If any of these four things happen, those are actions that Pardot is now able to say, aha, now I know who that person is. I have a name to put to the number. I have a name to put to the IP address. That is Laura Black. Before it was 124.36.94. whatever. Now it's Laura Black, and now Pardot says, okay, whenever this person visits a page that I have a tracking code on, it will ping back to Pardot and identify them and record their visits. Oh, they visit this page, that page, fill out this form, and so on. That data will then be retained in the actual prospect record that now has a name associated to it. So I want to talk about the kind of how the sausage is made a bit when it comes to that actual active recording that information, and it's at the campaign level. And so I'm not going to go deep into what Pardot campaigns are and the Pardot Salesforce relationship. I think Laura's probably going to cover that in her part of this, maybe, or future slides, future presentations. But in order to be able to get a tracking code, you have to go into a campaign. So I've kind of included a screen grab of what that visually would look like. You go into a tab called Pardot Campaigns. You click on that campaign, the active campaign, whatever you want to call it. You'll have a list of campaigns here. So you've clicked it. Say, okay, cool. I see my campaigns. This is a campaign. Let's say it's 2020 Partners Feature Announcement. This is the campaign that I want to use to associate to this specific web page or to this website. So I click in there, and it brings me to a view of the actual web page of the campaign. I didn't include the button in here. There's a button in the top right that says view HTML, that says view code or view HTML, one of the two. Click that, and this is what you see. So this is the code that you would be pasting either. Yeah, good point, Laura. This is all in the Lightning app, not Classic. This is a code that you would hand off to like your IT manager, somebody who manages your website, or you, if that's what you do. You copy this and you paste it in either the header of your web page globally, or put it in your tag manager. And a little bit about what you're seeing here. So you see here that there's a lot of brackets and a lot of just stuff here it's very code and JavaScript centric. So what you have here is you have the PI AID and the PI CID. The PI AID is your Pardot account ID. Your PI CID is the ID for that specific campaign. And that's important because of first party, third party cookies. First party cookie is the direct relationship at the domain level between the asset, between like the form and the campaign and the website that it's living on. Third party is you're on Nike.com and you're served an ad from some store or some party cookie that's serving you that's being used to serve you ads via this ad network. Third party cookies are increasingly going out of fashion for privacy reasons and things like that. And so Pardot has released its version of first party and all of the steps that are required to achieve that. The last part here is the PI hostname. The PI hostname is what I think Laura's going to cover a little bit in your tracker domain. This is the domain that would be, for example, if your company is like acme.com, it'd be like the host name here would be go.acme.com or www1.acme.com, something that relates back directly to your company's domain that should align with the domain that the code is sitting on, the website is sitting on. So the tracking code acme.com should sit on a web page that ends with acme.com, and your form URL, if you're hosting a form like through an iframe, that should also be at like acme.com. I realized I went down a bit of a rabbit hole. That was a bit of a high level discussion, but when you're looking at this stuff, this is what you're going to see and this is what you're going to grab. You're going to take this out of the campaign and drop it into the website, either the website kind of the back end itself or through a tag manager. So now that you've grabbed this is what is going to set that cookie. This is what's going to trigger the cookieing. And the thing about how this works, and Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, this is something that I was like pretty sure I understood, and then I was like, wait a second, maybe that's not how it works. The cookieing that happens when an anonymous visitor visits a web page and is cookied using a tracking code from this campaign, the act of visiting is their first touch. And that sets the source campaign, because the source campaign is the campaign that is in use for that the tracking code came from.
It's their first touch. So let's say that you put out a social post on Twitter or something like that. And in that social post, you don't link right to your blog post. You use a Pardot custom redirect. Well, we'll talk about custom redirects later, but Pardot custom redirects, quote unquote, belong to a campaign. When you build them, you have to say, this custom redirect belongs to a campaign. So you put out your social post and you use the custom redirect on it. If the person who clicks it, their first interaction with you and your website was actually clicking that custom redirect, they're going to get attached to a source campaign saying this is their first tracked touch with your Pardot stuff. They would belong to that social media campaign. If they do like a Google search and click a result that's not an ad and it's for your website, and they just organically appear on your site, they're going to get attached to your website tracking code, whatever you have deployed to your website. So if Ben has deployed this one to his entire website and they land on your website, they're going to get a source campaign equal to the first Pardot tracked thing that they touched. Source campaign and Salesforce campaign are kind of at odds. Don't worry about that. That's not on the exam. There's a whole rant about that. We don't need to talk about it. But
yes,
this is how you get tracking code on your website so that you can see what people are doing as they visit your site. So, Ben, I'm visiting Ben's site. I'm anonymous until I fill out a form, but Pardot is tracking, oh, I visited the About page. I visited the Contact Us page. And then I finally filled out a form on one of the resource things, and Pardot will attach all of my page visits to my prospect record after I fill out the form. So it's tracking me because I was anonymous. I've got an anonymous tracking cookie. I fill out a form. I become known, and then Ben can see what I do and who I am.
Yep.
A great example.
This is a view of you're able to actually see. This is certainly not a Google Analytics view by any means. There is no analog to Google Analytics in Pardot. They don't try to be. But if you were to go into prospects and then up here you see prospects, then there'll be something over here on the left that says visitors. You would be able to see a visitor report. And what this shows you is it shows you visitors who have been recorded as having visited either a landing page or a Pardot landing page or a website with a Pardot tracking code on it. And so there's two different examples here. This first one here is Amanda Smith. Amanda Smith, she has a name, and her name is recording here because Pardot has identified that relationship. There's an established cookie relationship between Amanda and her browser, and so it's recording the number of visits and the pages. If I wanted to see a deeper view into all the pages that Amanda visited in this session, I would click this and it would give me kind of it's not terribly sexy, but it's literally just like a readout of like, here's all the pages here's where she entered and here's where she left. And here's the browser, and if she came in through Google or whatever. And yeah, you're exactly right, Cooley. That's true. Whereas down here, we have this visitor who is considered anonymous, and it says create associate. So this person, their cookie relationship has not been established between their browser and Pardot. You can, if you know that who this person is, if you've done some backtracking and you're like, I know that this is Laura. It didn't associate or she didn't fill out a form or whatever, but I know this is Laura. You can click create associate and either associate her to an existing, or you can create a prospect and set that alignment to happen. And that's now telling Pardot, okay, this is Laura. So whenever anybody associated this cookie should now be tagged to Laura, and all of her visit data will appear here in her prospect record. You were able to do some filtering here around active visitors, identified visitors. You can search by campaign. This kind of goes back to that tracking code I was telling you about, where if you've got a specific tracking code for a specific campaign or a landing page and you want to only see that view for that specific campaign, you can see that here. You can also filter by different date ranges, like today, yesterday, last week, this week, last year, this year, custom, and you can view by either first page view or last page view. All these things together will give you this view. There are some charts up here that'll give you kind of it's not terribly useful, I don't think. It's not great, but it's kind of just a view of kind of like it's like a table of here's over time, here's who's visited and here's from what company. But this is a way to view it. Something else I want to talk about is the concept of an active prospect. So when someone visits a web page, there are only a handful of actions that will that will tell Pardot this person is active. And one of them is visiting a web page that has a tracking code on it. If that visit's been recorded, then that sends a message to Pardot, this person should now be considered active because they're now engaging with our cookied assets in some way. If that's happened recently, then they will have this little light green kind of guy next to them, sort of like this little person next to the name. If it's red, if it's like blood red, they've never been tracked to have engaged ever. They're just there. There is a third option where they are bright, or where they are dark green, and dark green means that they've been active. And then I think what I read was like the last 20 minutes, 20 or 30 minutes, that it's very recent. So something that they did happen very recently. But this is a way that Pardot shows you that level of engagement, that level of activity at the individual record level. So you can see, so when you're going through your prospects and you see these different colors, if someone is suddenly dark green, that means that they're either on your website now or they were there in the last 20 minutes typically. Amy, this is probably the issue with being on the ultra wide, is because when it's on the ultra wide into the smaller screen, it kind of like zooms it. So I apologize. I can maybe make this a little. Is that any better? I don't know if that's any better. I kind of just shrunk down the screen a bit. Back up. Whoopsie. So yeah, I don't know why all my images just went fuzzy. That's weird. I'm just gonna come back out again because I'm sorry. I apologize. That's causing a problem there. So what was the question? So red means that they've never been active. They're in your database, but they've never been recorded as having clicked the link, visited a cookied web page, filled out a form, done anything. Email opens don't count as an activity. It's considered kind of a passive action. It's an actual, like, they click the thing to like take them somewhere on your assets, on your web page or whatever. Yes, Rex, I definitely agree, and that's an interesting observation. I'll certainly can funnel that back to the product team at Pardot and let them know that it's a accessibility issue. So thanks for bringing that up. So the next thing I want to show you here is this prospect data, like kind of like showing you an example of what this source campaign versus conversion point and activity, anonymized activity until conversion looks like in a prospect record. So what we have here, and the first thing here is the source campaign. This is one of my dev orgs, so I just literally just filled with a bunch of gobbledygook data. So aggregate mission critical action items don't mean anything. It's just like a bunch of strung together words. But this is a track. This would be a tracking code. So if I were to have the code on a web page, I could, and this person, Amanda Smith, visited this web page, let's say via Google. We've got these we've got web page visits here, you see, and everything here just says view, visit, view, visit, view, visit. Nothing here says success until April 25th. Up until this point, Amanda on her with her anonymized visitor record and her IP is just visiting stuff, and Pardot saying, okay, all right, following, got it, watching and waiting, and then boom, they fill out a form that pushes back that data back to Pardot. Now Pardot can say, all right, you're now Amanda Smith. I get that. You gave me that information. I can now put a name to the IP address, and I can actually create a prospect record now. So because of that, now you have this prospect record and all of this previous engagement data. And because of that, you've also now got a conversion point. This means the conversion point is the point where they converted from a unknown visitor to a known prospect. That's critical. Conversion point and conversion date. Your conversion point is the point at which, if you want a way to remember it, the point at which you became a known prospect. The conversion date is the date and time at which you became a known prospect. So this is kind of how that views. This is kind of the view of what that would look like in an actual prospect record.
One thing I'll add is it's totally normal for a prospect to have a different source campaign than their conversion point. And that's because, like I said before, their source campaign maps to how did they first come, like what was the first thing that they engaged with that brought them to your site, the first Pardot track thing. So it might be that their source campaign is that Twitter post, but the form they filled out is a white paper, and the two aren't related at all. That just means that, oh, they engaged with XYZ first, they surfed around your site, maybe they left, then they came back, finally filled out a form, they converted on this form. So totally normal if they are not the same thing.
Yep. And this is just that kind of cookie relationship. And this is people get frustrated by this because they're like, the source campaign, why is the source campaign not the form? And it's
I'd
just
say
how
to new people, don't waste much time worrying about source campaign. It's literally just a first touch point, and it might not even be their true first touch point if you didn't start using Pardot and Salesforce at the exact same time, which most of us haven't. How is a source campaign tracked if an end user isn't cookied? If they are in Pardot and have never been cookied, then it most likely means that you imported them. And when you're doing an import in Pardot, you're asked, what is the source campaign of this import? And you would pick a campaign there. Or it could be that they came in via their sync to Salesforce. And in your Salesforce Pardot connector settings, you're asked, what is the campaign associated with this connector? And the one I usually pick is one I create called synced to Salesforce or synced with Pardot, something like that. And so a source campaign, something like that, tells you they came from an import or they came from the Salesforce connector.
Yeah, so this is I realize that we're definitely blowing through time here, but
yeah,
that's a good example. That's exactly they're exactly right. So when you go into import, you're going to ask to create via either like your CSV, and then at that point you're going to say, okay, what campaign is this person associated to? You cannot just willy-nilly say drop them into the database, and everything. If you remember nothing else, remember that everything in Pardot has to start at a campaign in some way, shape, or form. The prospect, all your assets, email, landing page, links, forms, assets, everything is aligned to a campaign, and that obviously extends to when you're creating prospects. Like an example of aligning a prospect to a campaign via import is like a trade show. You have a bunch of opted in records from a trade show, and you need to get them into Pardot. You didn't use a form, but you have a CSV. You would go and import the CSV, and you would select the form for that event. You say 2022 event name, whatever, import, and then all those people would enter. Anybody who does not already exist in Pardot will have their record updated. Well, we'll have the record created in their source campaign as that 2022 event, because you imported them and set the event and set the source campaign at that. But they will not have a conversion point because there's no conversion happening. Last thing I want to show in here is the visitor audit. Visitor audit is super important, and it's also very valuable. So whenever you go to a prospect record that's converted, you would want to, you can click on this tab called audits. And what the audit will do is this is a running list of everything that's happened with that prospect since the point of its creation, since the point of conversion. So what you have here is you have source, and sometimes it'll say source, sometimes it'll say CRM, sometimes it'll say automation. If it says web tracking, then these are all things that happened as a direct result of that tracking code relationship when they were an unknown visitor. So you have all these prospect default fields setting. You have the campaign setting here. You have the see here, prospect created - form submission, converted from visitor. So this is that IP that was converted via this form, and became Amanda Smith. So it tells you in kind of very kind of granular detail the actions that happened and when they happened. There's more information down at the bottom, but I didn't include that because that's not necessarily relevant to the visitor part of this. But this is what you would see, and if you're asked about a visitor audit, this is typically what they're talking about, is when you're needing to walk backwards to understand why or how something happened to a prospect. The audits is typically the first place that I go. is why, when did this happen? Like if fields start overwriting themselves, you'll see the overwriting happening. It's like it was here, and then 20 minutes later, it rewrote back to the CRM value, and then kind of overwritten again, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The audits are going to have all that detail and more, really. But when it comes to using for visitors and prospects, that initial conversion point is going to tell you, like the visitor audit is going to tell you what was changed, when it was changed, how the association happened, and the source of all those changes. And there are a few links in here that will be on the presentation that will be shared out. Some more deep dive views into prospects and cookies. There's also a great article on Automation Champion about the differences between visitors and prospects. His article goes into a lot of detail, so I'd recommend it. And you can obviously get it when you, yeah, Rex, you're exactly right. Visitor audits is very similar to Salesforce field tracking. So you'll be able to visit all those web pages once you get the link for the presentation. And now it is on to Laura.
No pressure, no pressure. Let me share my screen. I want to share this one.
We will probably run a little bit long just because we had that kind of intro about who and what and where and when. So if you're not able to stay, that's okay. We're going to be sending out the recording. But yeah, just because we had that long intro. We won't have that same long intro for the second session.
We'll do better. See my screen okay?
Yes.
I'm showing the administration. So this is when you look at the Pardot exam guide, it's telling you 11% of your questions are going to be based on illustrate how to create, edit, and map fields, explain the relationship between Pardot and Salesforce, describe the capabilities of the Pardot recycle bin. Like these are the big concepts that they want us to know as we go into the exam. So part of that is they're going to want you to know how to install the Pardot Lightning app. So Pardot Lightning is what we've been showing you. If you are a Pardot user and you've been logging into pi.pardot.com, that's considered Pardot Classic. The Pardot Lightning app is the app inside Salesforce where you can pick from the switcher, the little hamburger type icon in the top left corner of Salesforce that lets you pick between apps. You can switch to the Pardot Lightning app and you can see the screens Ben and I are sharing. It's all the same things you're used to in Pardot Classic. It's just the menus are in different sections. Like when you're looking for a segmentation list in Pardot Lightning, it's under the prospects tab, and then wait for the menu to load, and then you'll see segmentation on the left side of the prospects tab. There's no longer a marketing menu that you pick from there. It's all in different places. So installation, when you're brand new, when your company acquires Pardot, you're going to do some very specific things. Like you're going to install the core Pardot app from the App Exchange, and your Salesforce admin has to do this. So your Salesforce admin then grants permission sets to your Pardot admin and users. There's a whole installation guide that I'm linking out to. And then once those two tasks are done, the app is installed. The Pardot admin navigates in Salesforce setup. The Salesforce admin goes to the Pardot account setup screen, and they'll create their first business unit and name a user, the admin. So this is what you're seeing here. So in Salesforce setup, you go to the Pardot account setup page, you name your business unit, and every Pardot instance is considered a business unit now. If you come buy the additional more expensive Pardot versions that have additional business units, you'll see the option to add new business units. You can add more than one. But to set it up, you'll name it. I named mine Pardot Pro because that's me. Your business unit ID gets established, and then you have to name the admin. And I named myself. The admin that's named here is not a big deal. If you need to change it later, you can't, but it doesn't matter. Even if the person leaves the company, doesn't matter. This for setup, like literally the Pardot admin goes and clicks a couple buttons, and then this business unit admin is never used again. So don't worry about it too much. The Salesforce admin can name themselves if they want to. So one of the things to know about setting everything up is new Pardot accounts are on what's considered the V2 connector. If you have an older Pardot accounts and you're on the V1 connector, you can upgrade to the V2 connector, but you can't go backwards. The V2 connector is the better way to go about it, in my opinion. Some people differ. But the V2 connector ties your Pardot account to a single Salesforce account. You can't switch your Pardot account, like your company is abandoning this Salesforce org because it's a mess and they're getting a whole new one starting from scratch. Yes, I've totally heard this. You can't move your Pardot account from one Salesforce org to another on V2. So just keep that in mind. But you get more benefits from the V2 connector than you do negatives. So definitely, I think it's worth doing. V2 connector is basically always on, but it's in paused mode and you have to unpause it to sync. And important note is that when it's in paused mode, things in the background are continuing to sync. So your Pardot users, your Salesforce campaigns, your other metadata continues to sync with Salesforce, but prospects and prospect fields do not sync while in pause mode. You can, however, manually sync them if you need to, but that's a good gotcha. You probably won't encounter a question about it on the exam, but it's an important detail that does catch Pardot admins. So this is what the connector looks like more or less. In Pardot Lightning, you go to Pardot settings and then you go to the connectors section. Here, the connector is in paused mode. You can see that the username is something very ugly. This is what I mean by it's tied to your org ID. That like number and letter thing at the end of it, that's my org ID for Salesforce. So I'm going to go turn some settings on in the connector. So I'm going to access the connector and hit edit settings. And then this is the first tab that I'm on, these connector settings. And you can see there's some additional tabs across the top for user sync, marketing data sharing, and campaigns. We're just going to like take a quick look at this. You can see that there's some check boxes. You can see that there's this choose campaign option that I mentioned earlier, where I say that my connection between Pardot and Salesforce is via the connector and that there's a campaign named. This is where I name that campaign. And so leads and contacts who are created in Salesforce and sync down to Pardot come through the connector and they inherit this campaign that I've set here. This is their source campaign. And then there's some other options for email logging and email notifications that you can drop down and take a look at what's there. Before you turn on your connector, something that you need to determine is, should all of your Salesforce data sync from Salesforce to Pardot, yes or no? And in some companies, they're very strict about like, well, we bought a subsidiary and this data should not be seen by these employees or for whatever reason. If you need something like that, you need to set up what's called marketing data sharing. And it's very specifically, you need to set it up, or you should set it up before you unpause your connector for the first time. There's a link here for you to read more about it. It's very complex, but basically your Salesforce admin needs to create a field on the lead and contact records that is like a true false field. Could be a drop down, could be a checkbox, something like that. You need to use like a formula to fill it. And basically, if you don't want it to sync, Salesforce needs to, toggle that field in a certain way. And then the marketing data sharing settings detects that setting and determines if it should sync to this Pardot business unit or not. And if you have multiple business units, you'll need multiple fields, one for each business unit. And they all need to do basically the same thing. Ben Lamoth should not sync to my business unit 1. Therefore, the field in Salesforce says this. It should sync to business unit 2, but not to business unit 3. So I have 3 separate fields saying either true or false. To get to marketing data sharing, that's that tab across the top of the connector, and you'll configure this on the lead, contact, and opportunity objects. And when you click this little edit button on the right side, you'll see this pop up, and it's out of the box set to use default connector settings, which is everything syncs. To restrict what syncs, you need to choose use explicit criteria. You'll pick the field and then the operator being equals and the value. So for example, current generators equals true, that will be syncing. Does it sync, yes or no? And that's where I'm saying you need a Salesforce field that is toggled to say this is shared with Pardot and it is shared with this Pardot business unit, yes or no. Most of us will not be using marketing data sharing. You might encounter a question about it on the test, so it's good to know that if you're supposed to restrict data from sharing to one business unit or another, that's how you do it, is marketing data sharing. Most of us will have this setting here checked that I'm outlining. It says automatically create prospects in Pardot if they're created as a lead or contact in Salesforce. Here's a zoom into that. This is an optional setting, but I recommend it. Basically, it's, Salesforce doesn't get populated with leads and contacts only by marketing. Sales team is connecting with people all over the place, and they're creating a lead or a contact because they're following up with somebody. We still want those people to show up in Pardot, right? So this setting, when you check it and you save the connector and turn the connector on, this setting says from this point in time forward, every lead and contact comes into Pardot as a prospect. It does absolutely nothing for leads and contacts who were created before this date. To get those people into Pardot, you need to do what's called the historical sync, where you pull an export from Salesforce of your leads and an export from Salesforce of your contacts and import them into Pardot. All you need is their email address and their CRM ID. Import those two lists, one of leads, one of contacts, into Salesforce, into Pardot, and Pardot will create the mapping and be like, hey, here's all these prospects matching your leads and contacts. That'll get you everybody in your Pardot instance, not just from this point in time forward, but all of your historical leads and contacts too. So when you have all that set up, we're going to unpause the connector, and that means sync begins. So here's, again, in writing what I just said. After you unpause the connector, leads and contacts created after this time will sync to Pardot. One thing to note is if you pause the connector, as I noted before, leads and contacts are not synced while the connector is paused. So leads and contacts will not be created or synced while the connector is paused. So if you have some sort of data discrepancy, you need to divorce Pardot and Salesforce for a little bit. Any leads, contacts created while the connector's in that pause state will not be created. They will not be updated. You might have some sync issues when you connect them back up again. So when you are ready to turn your connector on, or if you've paused it for whatever reason, just come back to this connectors page. Now you're going to hit this resume sync button, and you see this nice green message. Things have been started. You see this checkbox in the green in the middle that says status is good to go. I'm zooming. Sorry, I promise I can take questions later. I can't see any questions with my screen share the way it is, but I'm just going to move on. So one thing that you definitely want to do, and that I'd recommend doing before you do any Pardot historical importing, is you want to set up your Pardot fields and map them to Salesforce. So Pardot comes out of the box mapped with a lot of fields like first name, last name, email address, email opt-out, job title, country. A lot of those things are already mapped, and you can see the list on this link that I had. But marketing is going to want a number of custom fields from Salesforce to show up in Pardot. And those might be fields that you're going to use to determine your segmentation for marketing outreach, things like that. You want to set those up in Pardot. And in Pardot, you find them under Pardot settings. You go to this menu on the left that says object and field configuration. You have account fields, opportunity fields, prospect fields. You also have custom objects if you bought that version that includes custom objects. I'm only going to talk about prospect fields because the process for account and opportunity is very similar. But prospect fields, basically the screen that we're looking at shows you at the bottom the default fields. And as you can see, I have like address 1, and the Salesforce.com field name is street in Salesforce. So if you're familiar with Salesforce admin stuff, that is the API name of the Salesforce field, okay? On the top, I've created a custom field called the Salesforce created date. So that maps to the Salesforce field with the API name created date. So that, because it's a prospect field, it tells me this is the date this lead or contact was created in Salesforce, okay? Which can be very different from the date that it's created in Pardot. That's getting down a rabbit hole I won't go down, but basically, this is the page you go to when you create all of your prospect fields. When you create a custom field or you edit a field that's mapped to Salesforce, When you save the field and there's a Salesforce field synced to it, you're going to get a pop-up that says, do you want to sync all of your prospects? This is how many prospects will be affected. Usually you want to say yes on that screen. The exception will be if you're making like 10 custom fields. Say no until you go to like your final field and then sync everything down. But basically, when you create a Pardot field, it's created in a vacuum. Yes, you're syncing it to Salesforce, but just creating a Pardot field does not automatically force Pardot to sync everything down. It's not until you force the sync that Pardot goes out and pulls everything down from Salesforce. So field mapping has another part when you're doing your Pardot implementation. This is also good to check if things aren't quite syncing the way you think they should be. One part of implementation is that when you have a lead and you convert it to a contact, some of those fields should go onto the contact record or perhaps onto the opportunity or onto the account when the lead is converted, right? So for example, stuff like the job title should go onto the job title field in Salesforce. That stuff is already set up in Salesforce, but installing the Pardot app created some Pardot only fields. You want to make sure those fields are also mapped from the lead to the contact record. So in Salesforce, you're going to go to Salesforce Setup. You're going to go to the Object Manager. You're going to go to Leads because we're dealing with what happens with lead fields when they get converted. You're going to go to Fields and Relationships. And then on this page in the top right, it's Map Lead Fields. And you see a screen like this. And here I'm looking at what happens to these fields when it's converted. I want these fields to go onto the contact object. And your company may set things up in different ways, but this is how I generally set them up. So one of the Pardot fields that is it's created with the app install is this custom field for the Google Analytics UTM campaign, UTM content, UTM medium, etc. I want those lead fields to show up on the contact field when I convert from lead to contact. So just go through this page and make sure your field mapping is set up. And then the next big part before you're really ready to start using is domain management. So this is a section in Pardot under settings. It's called domain management. I'll show you this screen in a second. The first part of it is setting up your email domain authentication. So one of the biggest parts of Pardot is I'm going to be sending emails, right? And we've all seen phishing emails come into our inboxes. It looks like it's from Amazon, but when you look closer, it's actually from some random like AOL account or something like that, right? So you don't want to look like that. You don't want to look like a spammer. So you want to set up email authentication. It basically says, when you send an email, the recipient's like, hey, wait a minute. This email doesn't say it's coming from Pardot Pro unless I set up email domain authentication. So we want to pass off the handshake that says, yeah, this email is coming from Pardot, but it's approved by Pardot Pro, so accept it as legitimate because I'm passing information. So there's two parts to email authentication, and you're going to need to pull in your website IT team. But basically, you go up to Pardot settings. On the left menu, you go to domain management. The top half of the screen is about your email sending domains. You're going to add a new domain. And here I've added my pardotpro.com domain, but I haven't set up any of my authentication. So you see these red exclamation point icons. Those are bad. You don't want those. You will work with your IT department to set up SPF records and to set up DKIM and domain. So DKIM is domain key identification. I forget what the M stands for, but I think it's management. But you're going to set up DKIM and DKIM policy and SPF. And when you have all of those set up, you'll click the middle icon that says, the middle text link that says check DNS entries, and they'll all turn green. Okay, you want them to be green. That means that you are sending authenticated email from Pardot. That's a good thing. Here, I moved some stuff around. Sorry, that slide's supposed to go somewhere else. I might have to zoom back to it. We'll fix that before we distribute the slides. Yep, okay, I put things in the wrong spot, so sorry. So the second part of the domain management page is the tracker domain. with the tracker domain, every email that you send out of Pardot is going to include links that say like, click here to get your whatever, right? Well, out of the box, Pardot is going to rewrite and encode that link in an email. And it's going to say, this link was sent to Ben, this link was sent to Laura, this link was sent to Rex. And it's going to know that when somebody clicks this link, it was sent specifically to me and I'm the one who clicked it. It wasn't Ben, it wasn't Rex, it wasn't anyone else. Out of the box, that URL that Pardot rewrites and encodes says go.pardot.com and then some long, ugly string of stuff. Looks totally fake, right? So if I'm sending an email, I don't want it to do that. I want it to say go.pardotpro.com. That's my tracker domain. In IT parlance, it's a custom CNAME that's pointed to go.pardot.com. When you set it up, it's super simple. It doesn't take much at all for your IT teams to set it up. When you set it up, your Pardot emails, those links are no longer rewritten and encoded saying go.pardot.com. They are now rewritten to include your domain. So it still is go.pardotpro.com and then the long string. That long string is normal, but it no longer is like, hey, what the heck is that Pardot company? So the second half of the domain management page is this section for tracker domains. I do not have this set up. As you can see, the section below where I have www.pardotpro.com is not validated. You don't want that. You want it to look more like the one that I highlighted, the fake linuxsoft.com company. That's validated. So there's just a very straightforward CNAME for your IT people to set up. It should take them like 5 minutes. They'll probably do it at the same time they set up the email stuff from above. And then there's this first party tracking thing that Ben mentioned before. So at the very bottom of the domain management page is where you grab the first party tracking code. So yes, you can grab it from the campaign page. That's traditional page, you get it, but that's a Pardot hosted tracking code. The first party tracking code is found on this page, and you will deploy it to your website pages the same way you deploy the other tracking code. You would deploy one or the other. I would recommend on your own website, you're deploying this first party tracking code. It should match your domain. So on my website, I should have tracking code served by pardotpro.com. And if I am sending something out to another, like an Instapage or something like that, I might use that other tracking code that Ben noted. So I'm going to give thanks to Jen Kazin for this article that I'm linking here and for this screen. But basically, you can see that the code is very similar to what Ben showed before. But this is this would be, instead of you see the PI AID and the PI CID, now you also see PI hostname. And when you have first party tracking fully set up, it's going to say your domain. So it would, for me, say www.pardotpro.com. As you can see, this is just the screenshot from the article that Jen was demoing. So, but do go read Jen's article. It's very, very helpful to understand it. So those three things are what's on the domain management page. I'm going to skip back to the stuff that I meant to talk about, which is the account settings page. Sorry. I was doing a lot of stuff as I was making this and I wasn't paying attention. So account settings page, what is on this page is some stuff about your Pardot account, your agreement with Salesforce to have Pardot. You have your account information. So that's like your account name, your account address, things like that. The usage and limits tab is very helpful. You also, in this section, have your Pardot IP address, which is like, as you're sending email, what IP address is that email coming from? You have your first party cookie settings, whether you're turning first party cookies on or off so that you can get that code that I just showed you. You have the toggle that says, yes, I want to allow operational emails to be sent or not. You have your Pardot resubscribe links. You have to click edit to access it and opt into it. But here's a whole article about the account settings page, which again, we'll distribute the slides. I'll fix the slides order so that you see them properly. It all makes sense. But here's the account settings page. So under Pardot settings tab, On the top left, the first option is account settings. This is the page that you see. So this is where I said this is your account name, your address, what version of Pardot you have, all that kind of stuff. This section that I've highlighted for product and service notifications is things like, if there's a problem and we need to notify you of something, who are we notifying? So if I am up for renewal, who does that go to? Does it go to me? Does it go to my assistant? Does it go to someone else? If there's a problem with email that you have sent where you have a crap ton of unsubscribes and you're going to get a nasty message about your email being out of compliance, who's it going to go to? If there's a Pardot outage, who are they notifying? That kind of stuff. Who does it go to? So that information is important here. Here's the usage and limits tab that I briefly mentioned. So this screen is the left tab. So just above account information, it says account. The second tab says usage and limits. And this tells you about this account has 50,000 API requests. How many are you using? This account, your mailable database is 10,000. How many are you using? These bars will show like red if you're getting close to your mailable prospects and things like that. So this is, how much of what are you allotted and how much are you using? So this is a good place to know what you have and what you don't have. So for example, near the bottom, you can see you have a number of files being unlimited, but your limit is actually 100 megabytes. I think that's wrong, but I'm just rounding. But you can see how much of your file storage you're using. I zipped through this because it was out of order. Okay. Last thing that the certifications section wanted us to talk about was the Pardot recycle bin. And this is important because when you say delete a lead or a contact from Salesforce and it is synced to a Pardot prospect, Pardot automatically sends those prospects to the Pardot recycle bin. Once they're in the recycle bin, you can choose to permanently delete them. So we're going to look at the screen and see what it looks like, things like that. So in Pardot settings, if you go to the recycle bin, so again, Pardot settings tab, scroll down, go to the recycle bin, and you have like everything that you make in Pardot has a spot in the recycle bin. There's automation rules. Once you delete an automation rule, it's never really deleted. You could restore it from the recycle bin if you wanted to. So scroll down to the bottom and find prospects. And then this is what it looks like when you're into the prospects. So for example, I'm looking at, I deleted these 2 prospects. I can do stuff with them, like I can check the box and choose at the bottom to permanently delete them, or I could choose to restore from the recycle bin. So something to know about the recycle bin is that prospects in the recycle bin can come out of the recycle bin, and your exam wants you to know how can they come out of the recycle bin. So the most common way that prospects come out of the recycle bin is probably when you as the Pardot admin are doing an import into Pardot. Like you have I want to send this email and it needs to go to these people. If some of those people are in the recycle bin, the easiest way to restore them is do an import with that email address. And during the import wizard, one of the options is restore deleted prospects from the recycle bin. So that will pull people out of the recycle bin. So that's you as a Pardot admin restoring them. Pardot prospects can restore themselves from the recycle bin. So if my prospect@gmail.com fake person is in the recycle bin, and then they go to my website and they fill out a Pardot form on my website, that action that the Pardot prospect took themselves can restore them from the recycle bin. So these are things that you want to know about. How do people end up in the recycle bin, and how can people get restored, and how to permanently delete them. And then Pardot users. So this wasn't necessarily part of the outline of the exam, but I wanted to talk about your Pardot users. So generally your Pardot users are created from Salesforce users. So I'm the Pardot admin, I have a Salesforce user, and I also have a matching Pardot user attached to my Salesforce user. Pardot has a feature called Pardot User Sync that enables this discussion between Salesforce and Pardot about who is automatically created with Pardot access and who isn't. But basically this screen here, so back in the connector, so again, Pardot settings, being back in the connector, I clicked edit on the connector, and now I'm on the tab that says User Sync. this is the left-hand column is the Salesforce profile. So perhaps I don't want to give the authenticated website profile any access to Pardot at all. Maybe there's 2 people who need that for another tool. I can change the right-hand column here to be none, and they don't get any access to Pardot. But maybe I want the contract manager who works with the sales team to have access to Pardot, but only access to the records that they own in Salesforce, and that's the sales role in Pardot. So this is how you map your Salesforce users to automatically become Pardot users and grant them access. And this is where you can see who does and doesn't have Pardot accounts, Pardot user accounts. So maybe your company has 500 Salesforce users, but you only have 10 Pardot users because of that profile mapping that I set up. Here's where you can see who they are. And they really should have different CRM usernames, which is usually an email address, but not always. Pardot's pretty picky about that kind of stuff. And then here is Pardot access roles. So there's 4 standard access roles. So as a Pardot admin, I get the administrator role. That means I can do everything in Pardot, including importing users, creating emails. I can see all records, even ones that I don't own in Salesforce. Marketing cannot buy additional Pardot features, but an admin can. Sales can only see the records that they own. Sales managers can see all prospect records, and they can see some reporting stuff in Pardot reporting. But then you can also create a custom role where I did not take a screenshot of it, but basically you could come up with some blend of like, I want a marketing super user who can send Engagement Studio, but I also want, excuse me, I also want a more junior marketing person who can't do that stuff. So you can set up these custom roles. Okay, that's it. I'm done with screenshots, but these are the different things that you can read. I definitely recommend the Trailhead modules about the Pardot Lightning setup, and then various help articles about managing your Pardot account, your Pardot Lightning app implementation guide, Pardot setup implementation guide, and other downloadable user guides. These are all PDFs on this slide. And then obviously there's a whole trail mix, which is like a whole series of Pardot modules, as well as some additional reading that we recommend. And that is all of the fun things. I will go back and see if there was any. Sorry, I zoomed through all of that without stopping.
Thank you, Laura, and that was awesome. Next time it won't be as rushed because we're not going to have that intro, that 15 minutes of intro. Okay. Yeah, I've been kind of keeping an eye on the questions. Natalie asked a question, but I don't know what she was in reference to. Says, is this true in Lightning but not Classic? And then Sylvia asked about admin. If you can do the same thing in Pardot as what you can do in Salesforce, where you're like log in as user.
Okay. Pardot admins cannot log in as other Pardot users. No, there's no reason to really. So no, you can't do that. You can have an unlimited number of Pardot users, but Pardot users need to be able to sign into Pardot via SSO. So I mentioned Pardot Classic. There is pi.pardot.com. You can use what is called a Salesforce identity license to grant them SSO login to Pardot Classic. You do not grant them access to Pardot Lightning with an identity license. It's a very, very limited license. To actually be able to see the screens that Ben and I are showing in Pardot Lightning, and in order to switch between multiple business units, you need to use Lightning. You will need to have a full Salesforce license for those users. They need more than just the identity license. So it is a little tricky. But if, for example, you work with a website person who is like coding the design of some iframe forms for you, they only need access to Pardot for that. They don't need a full Salesforce login. You can grant them one of those identity licenses, and they can log into Pardot Classic, and it won't cost you anything. It won't cost them a Salesforce user license. I'm not sure about is it the same between Classic and Lightning? So all of the menu options are available in both tools, but they're just in very different places. I hope that answers the question. What else we got? What do you do to test on behalf of a user? Not sure if it makes sense. Yeah, you don't need to test on behalf of another user. So Ben and I as admins can see the same things and do the same things. You don't have the granular permission sets that you necessarily have in Salesforce. So in Salesforce, you can do stuff like this type of user can never move a deal backwards, but a more senior user can move a deal backwards if they need to. Pardot doesn't have any kind of that. There's not like an approval process built in. So like as I'm building an email, I don't send it to another person for approval. That doesn't exist. But yeah, so there's no real need for that kind of stuff, I think.
I mean, if you need to test stuff, then you would do that in like in a sandbox org.
Yeah, so we won't really go into it with this. Pardot sandboxes do exist. They're only included on some of the higher priced plans. A Pardot sandbox is not a traditional sandbox. They call it a sandbox. It is not a fully functional sandbox. You cannot, for example, build something in a Pardot sandbox and promote it to production the way you can with a Salesforce sandbox or any other kind of sandbox. Pardot sandboxes are more akin to training environments where everything is the same, but you can't send email out of them. And every time you refresh your sandbox, it wipes itself. So that's not ideal from a sandbox perspective. Yeah, just, I mean, in Pardot admins are stuck testing in production because there is only really production Pardot. It is just a fact of life, unfortunately. Natalie, you said you meant on deleted records. Is it the same between Classic and Lightning on the recycle bin? Yes, absolutely. It is the same. The screens, like the body of the screens, all look the same between Classic and Lightning. It's just like where the menus have changed a little bit. The left-hand menus and tabs across the top have changed. So yeah. Then next session is next Wednesday, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to drop the link for the session? So if anybody hasn't registered for session 2, please register for sessions 2 and 3. And you'll, get the recording as we distribute it. We'll send it out. Just like you got a confirmation of registering for this, you'll get a confirmation of the next sessions.
Yep. 1 second. Session 2. Registration. And
I'll fix your slide, Ben, so that you're not me on the slides in the distribution.
Okay.
And I'll reorder my slides so everyone.
Okay.
You can see we didn't practice.
Yeah. Where did I'm trying to find my screen. It has the 1 second. I lost it. Yep. There it is. Got it. Sorry. Yeah, here's registration for the second session.
Awesome.
And I'll send that out to when I send out the recording for the first session. I'll make sure the note to sign up for this one, for the second one as well.
So everyone, I think we're going to wrap since we don't have questions coming in, but do reach out to us on Twitter or LinkedIn. We're happy to, help you out and come with more questions. Like, don't be afraid.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to help. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining. And yeah, we will see you this time next week.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See you then, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.